You are listening to Salty Believer Unscripted.
This is Salty Believer Unscripted. I'm Josiah Walker.
I'm Bryan, Catherman.
And on today's episode, I have a question.
All right.
I have a question I've been kind of wrestling with, and I thought maybe our listeners are wrestling with the same question. So
And
I
that
thought
is
I'd
what's
ask
happening
you.
with the Pac-12?
Yeah, exactly.
It's gone. It's
right?
disintegrated. Nope, that's not the question, is
Prime
it?
time, man. So, why is everything broken?
Too big, too much.
And I understand. I'm not asking why our
Genesis 3?
I'm not asking why our world is broken. Obviously, we all know sin caused our world to be broken. But, like, in the church, it feels like everything is broken in the church and the leadership of the church. And what I mean is, you know, I'm in seminary. Our listeners know that. I've been going to seminary. And, you know, we talked about the Trinity last week and a lot of the heresies that got dealt with around who Jesus is. And, you know, I remember reading about, you know, shortly after Jesus ascended into heaven, like 300 years after that, they dealt with a lot of heresies, a lot of doctrinal issues. And I just would feel like after some roughly 2,000 years, we'd have a lot of those doctrinal issues really drilled in, and we'd have answers to everything.
Well, so I don't think... I mean, okay, in our context, we're still debating the Trinity because there's LDS people.
Sure.
And we have some operational... Like, what are you... I mean, those things are still recirculating, right?
I know those things kind of come and go, but it seems like even, like, our listeners know, like, we're in a Southern Baptist affiliated church, right? And we've talked a lot about the SBC and issues there. And I see those guys arguing over leadership of the church and trying to define what a pastor is. And I want to know how, after all these years, we can still be trying to figure out who a pastor is. Like, we should have that pretty much. That's pretty basic, isn't it?
Dialed yeah.
That's like arguing about what the Lord's Supper is. Like,
Okay, so first, that's a good question. I don't think we can deal with why is everything broken.
But why does it feel like there's no direction or no clear vision for church leadership? Like, I feel like leadership in the church, there's a lot of uncertainty among pastors and leaders in different churches and denominations. Like, they're unclear of how to move forward, I guess.
Right. That's a hot topic. It's the hot topic.
I know it's
right
a little
now,
spicy.
Right? No, that's okay. No, that is the hot topic, and that's what you're getting at. This is what's broken, right? So I think it's first important to remember that since before, even before John the Baptist was on the scene, right? The Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Essenes all had differing views and debates on how they saw things.
Right.
So we got to know that there's going to be differing views, debates, and arguments on how we see things. And I think that's just sort of a given when we're all trying to make sense of this and we don't have the perfect lens by which to interpret the Bible from, unless we claim that we have a whole structure with prophets and whatnot. But even then, that stuff isn't lining up, and there's debates even within those circles, whatever. So in the case of the hot topic today, which is, I mean, let's just be frank. Who is a pastor? What is a pastor? Can a pastor be a man? Can a pastor be a woman? Can a pastor be... there was a time when could they be married? Could they not be married? Blah, blah, blah.
And
right?
even just within the Southern Baptist Convention, the Baptist Faith of Message is 23 years old. And now we're still having to go back and, change
the newest edition, but it went back even, to editions before that. So the 2000 Baptist Faith and Message, that we need to clarify, we need to redefine. I will say this. This is a giant, complicated question. Because it's actually not one question. It's like 40 questions that are all intertwined and they work together. And they.
So you can't answer this in 20 minutes?
No. Why everything? No, because no one's answering this in 20 minutes. But I think it's worth really addressing. These are.
Do you think it's an issue? Is it just me?
We as a church have been going through these things. We've talked quite a bit about who is qualified or what are the qualifications of eldership at Redeeming Life where we pastor. We've been talking about what is the role or the office of deacon and who's qualified in that and how do we interpret the scripture and here's the real question in a lot of ways. How do we use the Bible? I mean, some people are not even going there.
Sure.
This is what's right in society, and since the gender issue is really hot right now, and that's what everybody's debating, how are we going to resolve that? And we at Redeeming Life have said, well, we're going to really dig in and try to understand how the Bible answers that. Right. But not everybody's doing that.
Right.
So you have in various denominations, you have tradition that's well, we've always done it this way, and if we don't do it this way, then what? You also have, well, it just seems like in these times we need to communicate in this way. We have muddied up, confusing terminology and words with tradition and titles, and so I think what has to happen is you have to take a question like what's broken with church leadership, or why are all these churches trying to resolve these problems, or who was a pastor? You have to take that question really in a series of questions. So if you really want to address it, we have to address it probably in a series.
Sweet.
So
let's do it.
So it's a giant entangled ball of difficult questions.
I'm sure it's multifaceted. I'm sure there are a lot of issues.
Well, okay, so we've been dealing with this with our church council, with various leadership, as we've been studying here, eldership, deacons, because we merged two churches together. We're trying to get our constitution as close to the Bible as we believe, and so, as you know, we've been dealing with lots of questions. So maybe not so much for what the podcast would be, but if you don't dial in these questions, you can't get to the answers. And this is where I think the SBC failed in their discussion on the pastorate, right? We have, in the SBC anyway, you say, well, we can't have women have the title of pastor. But then at the same time, we have worship pastors who aren't elders, and we have functioning deacons that are functioning like elders, and then we have some churches that have women as deacons and some that don't, and then what about pastors, and then why, and then how, and what happens is people throw like one verse out and go, what's that? And it doesn't work. So I think what failed was this more robust conversation. It happened too quickly over the course of the the 2-day convention. Which,
that's always boggled my mind, how in 2 days they think they can tackle huge issues like that. Sometimes that's something that needs to marinate more.
Yeah.
To your point of like, a lot of times what fuels our decisions and our viewpoints on things are traditions of we've always done it that way, or we want to take one verse and just say, well, this verse says X, so we're going to go with that.
And pragmatism. We just got to fix the problem. Whatever fixes the problem.
So you're saying it actually involves more in-depth study than that, and maybe taking God's word and really...
Well, okay.
Because like with deacon, I feel like I could just pick up a book and say, well, what is a deacon? And find a book on the shelf that says, here's what deacons are.
But okay, so here's the thing about that. The Baptist Faith and Message doesn't speak a lot about deacons. The London Baptist Confession doesn't speak a lot about deacons. You pick up that book by Ben Merkel, it's like 40 questions on elders and deacons. And it's like 36 questions on elders and 4 questions on deacons. I mean, like, people give it such a small treatment. And so then that makes it complicated on the deacon part, but then we talk about the elders. Okay, so think about it like this. Just with the Southern Baptists, for example. Nobody was bringing up the reality of the fact that our Baptist Faith and Message, the Southern Baptist Confession, says that there are only 2 offices in the church. Right? Elder. And in this case, we changed the language to like elder, bishop, elder, pastor, or whatever, overseer, overseer, whatever. But basically,
like
pastor.
all the words. Are synonymous.
Pastor, elder, or whatever, and deacon. Okay, so that means that if you say, okay, well, we're going to have these people who are in the bucket of elder, and these people who are in the bucket of deacon, and then these people who are a woman's pastor for women's ministry over here, a children's pastor who's not an elder, or whatever. Did you create a new office?
Is there a third bucket, I guess?
Are the staff members deacons, elders, or a third office? Are the people, like, where's the line when it comes to serving? Is the deacon somebody you it's a whole separate thing, or is that a servant who all the people that are serving should meet quality? These are all the big questions. It's the office question. So here's some questions that I think have to be addressed in this conversation.
Okay.
How many offices are there in the church? And how is your church functioning in that? And we can't talk about every church, but most confessions, most churches would argue there's 2 offices, but then is there some other service role that's not an office? Or
and some churches do that because they're a nonprofit, they're an organization, so sometimes you have maybe an accountant or some IT people.
And do they fall into an office? Okay, so that's a big question that has to be asked. What is an officer in the church? How many offices are there? Are there roles that don't serve in an office? What is basic Christian service? Who sets the parameters for who's qualified for those offices? If it's 2 offices, and if it's elder and deacon, then the Bible. But if you have a third office, who builds the parameters for that? What authorities and responsibilities? authority versus responsibility. These are important questions. So 1 Timothy 2:12, I don't permit a woman to teach and have authority over a man.
Right.
Okay, what is that really saying, and what's the context of that verse?
Sure.
Does that mean a woman can't have, teach anything, so she can't be a school teacher? Or does that mean she can't be a Sunday school teacher? Or she can't have authority like a police officer? She can't have authority on a school bus and be a school... Or does that mean something else?
Right.
You have to get to... All of these things speak into each other, and so you get one answer, but if it doesn't fit the rest of the answers, you have a problem, right?
Yeah, they all kind of build off each other.
They work on each other. So what's the context of that statement? And then things like 1 Corinthians 14:34 through 37. I don't permit. Paul says a woman should remain quiet. Is that what that verse is? A woman should remain quiet and not speak in church. Okay, so what does that mean? What are the roles in the church in this way? Where do women serve and how do they serve? And so that kind of helps you. Like with the can a woman be a pastor question, you need to get all that biblically sorted out. Which then that's coming out of things like what are the gender roles, and you have egalitarian, complementarian questions.
So why is that such an issue now? Because I feel like that's something
because the gender issues in the world, I think, are bringing this to light. So a lot of these things, like the Trinity thing you brought up at the beginning, people are going along and they're assuming, hey, this is good, and then a heresy comes in.
Right.
Or a challenge comes in, and now they say, look, we have to deal with the challenge. We're assuming this, we understand it, but now we have to really articulate it. We have to address the challenge. And so I think what's happening now is challenges have come in.
That makes sense, because I remember reading in my textbook, just talking about like science and philosophy and kind of trying to, the wrestle was with creation and how was the world created. And that's kind of what brought on, like, has Jesus always existed?
Exactly.
So you're saying that we're dealing with issues today because of the world outside of the church.
Yeah, so it's pushing these issues, and then those issues are being, sometimes the church is dealing with the world that's outside the church.
Right.
Okay, and we're speaking into things like homosexuality, transgenderism, but some of those ideas creep into the church.
That makes sense.
And so then you have that's a lot of the Calvins, when that whole thing came out of Chalcedon and all those, and what was it, Dort? I think it was Dort.
Yeah.
When all those things were really starting to, Chalcedon's the wrong one. When all those things were really starting to come out, Tulip, the Calvinism tulip, is actually a response to 5 points of the Remonstrance. Right? So it wasn't like, Calvin just wrote this thing down.
Sure.
They were bringing their positions.
And Martin Luther's 95 Thesis was a response to the church.
Yes.
And I think Spurgeon dealt with some of this stuff.
The Great Downgrade.
Yeah. Meechin
was like, hey, within his denomination. So
liberalism and stuff.
These are just normal. These are normal occurrences that the church has to deal with.
Okay.
The problem I think we're having is because it's so prevalent in the world right now, it's crept into the church, I think, across the board. Sure. So you have it's
not just within our association.
No, it's not like, exactly.
Or a certain denomination.
It's playing out in lots of different ways, and it's just forcing the church to ask, ultimately, who are and what is the role of the stewards of the bride, the ones who tend to the bride of Christ? Who are they? What does that look like? And what is the Bible? What is its role and how it communicates? Do we get a pick for ourselves? Does the Bible communicate to this? Do we have the normative principle, the relative principle playing out? Like, these are so big that it's like if we could just get some big councils together, but nobody respects those councils anymore.
Well, you can't get people together because we won't even agree to begin with.
So. No. So I think the questions that we need to deal with in this series, if we're really going to understand why is the leadership in the church struggling in these areas, why are denominations splitting, why are we in such hot debate? The questions are probably things like, how many offices and what is an office? What are the roles of the office? What's the authority, if any, or responsibility of the offices?
Just really look at what leadership in the church is biblically.
We'll start with just even the offices, right? And then from there, I think it would be important to maybe deal with the two offices, or three, or four, whatever. Okay, so elder, deacon. So I think asking, what is an elder?
Well,
and what is a deacon? I think we need to ask those questions, right? And then is there another office? And ask those questions.
Is there another office? What are the requirements for that?
What are these qualifications?
What are the gender roles? Do women have a role in the church?
That's going to play in. Okay, so in these different offices and in these different roles, how do we understand 1 Timothy 3?
Right.
You know, and how do we... And so I think these are the kinds of questions you have to start really breaking down. And then, we don't ever really do, is we don't ever say, what are the consequences? If I believe there's only 2 offices...
Yeah.
That's going to have a certain ramification. If I believe women cannot serve in these roles, that's going to have certain ramifications. How does it all fit together? That's really the real tricky part. And because we didn't talk about that, like in the SBC, it was just, the question was just, can women be pastors?
I felt like it was more opinion-based. Well,
yeah. I mean, there was scripture, but
there was scripture, but
one question.
Yeah.
Can women be pastors?
And you had 5 minutes to decide.
Wait a minute. We have
vote.
to... Wait a minute. Yeah. There's so much stuff. We have to.
Well, and already it's funny because the backlash after that is seeing how many churches within the Southern Baptist Convention are different, right?
Yeah.
As far as like on a wide array of like, well, if pastor means elder, then a bunch of churches had pastors who weren't elders, and if only a man could be a pastor, then there were a lot of churches that had female pastors or female ministers,
or you have churches that have people who are pastors but not elders,
right?
So that's a problem. But some of those pastors who are not elders are females,
or elders who weren't pastors,
or deacons who are functioning like elders,
or
pastors who don't have the title of elder, or some churches
elders functioning like deacons.
Some churches that go, we don't have elders, we're not, Presbyterian, or
right.
Other churches that don't have any deacon, they don't have any concept of what a deacon is at all. So they would say, we don't have deacons. Well, biblically, there seems to be deacons, but that might mean you don't have like these 4 guys are our deacons. It might be, hey, everybody who serves is serving in the office of deacon, but they've just thrown that out. I mean, it's really complicated, right?
Well, I don't know whether to be reassured or more stressed out that this isn't as easy as I thought it would be to answer.
If it were that easy, I don't think we'd be dealing with it at all. But okay, so here's the thing, though. If we go through this series and we ask these questions, I think it's really important that we agree, and I would challenge our listeners to agree to this too, in a way. You have to actually be willing to put something down on paper or fix yourself to it. So if you ask the question, can women be pastors, and then you hear some answer you don't like, you go, well, I don't like that. Right. But then you don't provide you don't try to contribute to what do you like. Then you're just throwing grenades in the whole situation.
Sure.
You're not fixing it at all.
It can't be this. Well, what can it be?
Exactly. Okay, I hear that. And I think it's important to remember that there is going to be a great deal of perspective here, especially as we're trying to make sense of the Bible. So we're trying to interpret the Bible. Our church will take a position that's going to be very different than somebody else's position.
Sure.
And somebody else, a third church and a fourth church and a fifth church are going to have these different positions. And every one of those churches might really say, look, we are turning to the Bible. Just like baptism, right? Presbyterians and Baptists don't have the agreements in these things. And they both say we're turning to the Bible. And the Baptist, pedo baptisms.
Sure.
Like, we don't look at the consequences of that, but the Presbyterians can say, well, our Westminster Confession says whatever the natural consequences or the natural, whatever the word of that is, the obvious outpouring of that or the natural consequences or whatever that is in the clause. So we can go that way. So we have different ways of approaching it. Right. We're going to have to deal with it that way. So what was the big question? The big question was
why is church leadership seem broken these days?
Does church leader why are we so hotly debating it? And so I think the answer to that is to take a jaunt down an avenue that explores, and I like that, the stewards of the bride of Christ.
And you're saying to start with the Bible.
Let's just start with the Bible, but let's go through. I hope you wrote a bunch of those questions down. I was just spewing a bunch of. We have a list because we've been working through it. Yeah. So we probably need to start with like office. Yeah. We need to start somewhere like that. Okay. I mean, I'm sure our listeners want us to just immediately jump to the.
Sure.
What about the women piece?
Can a woman be a pastor?
But that's the question.
Let's start with what an office in the church is.
You need to build the foundation of what this is and why. And I think we're going to assume that the church is the collected body of believers, right? So we're talking about that. We have certain assumptions we're going to run from or run off of. Right. Right.
Traditions.
That's a big That's a big truckload. You're the one.
I didn't mean to just throw a grenade in there.
You're the one in seminary.
Yeah.
So I should put all this on you as like a homework assignment.
Perfect. All right then. Well,
here's what I want to do though. I think, if you have specific questions in this, if you're listening, what's our email address?
SaltyBeliever@gmail.com.
Yeah. Shoot us an email.
Yeah.
I think that'd be really helpful. Hey, specifically this. How do we understand it by, What about this? And maybe we're going to have things here that you really just disagree with us on. We'd love to hear from. Tell us.
All the better. Yeah.
Tell us where you think maybe we got that wrong and why. Point us to some scripture. Make an argument, because maybe we're trying. If I had the answers to all this,
right,
then
then we'd already have this. We'd be done. Instead, here we are. About time to wrap up, and we're not even going to be able to get into these topics.
Well, we'll jump into the first one.
Next time,
and
I guess.
Maybe the next one.
So, hopefully this is interesting to you guys, and we'll see what happens next as we take the Bible and look at what it means to steward the bride of Christ well. And I guess we'll start out next week with what is an office in the church.
Yeah, that's a good place to
look
start.
at that. All right, then. Well, until next time.
Thank you for listening. Find more information at SaltyBeliever.com.